But I just remember we were down at Diamond Gyms on Hollywood Boulevard. Vishnu John was, you know, they're chanting the old Hollywood melody, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And suddenly his eyes just got big and he said, Prabhupada. You know, and he hit the ground and we all turned around and there was Prabhupada in this little, I can't remember, like maybe a Ford Pinto or something, a small car. That's all I remember. Prabhupada was there making pranams. You know, I think, God, you know, we're like mlechas or something. And here Prabhupada was so happy to see the devotees, you know, out on Harinam preaching, you know, preaching the holy name on such a degraded place. And Prabhupada was so happy. He was making pranams. We all just, right there on the street, we all just hit the deck, you know. Prabhupada was just so pleased to see us out there preaching. So that's the first memory that I ever have of Prabhupada. It's still there anyway. I had come out to LA just for that purpose, to get initiated by Prabhupada. And as far as I know, that was the last fire sacrifice that Prabhupada did everything, where he sat there, chanted on the beads in front of everyone. I mean, it took hours because he chanted. It was 10 of us. It was myself, Jayatirtha, Krishnakanti, Dayanidhi, Chitralekha, and, you know, others I can't, it was 10 of us, that's what I remember, and Prabhupada chanted. So, you know, 10 rounds he had to chant in front of us. And I can remember seeing, you know, Prabhupada chanting, I had those, you know, Tandy Leather Company beads, little white ones. They looked like a little string of pearls in Prabhupada's hands, you know, and he was just, he had a special way of holding them like that and stretching them like this, you know. And he was chanting on my beads. And I reached forward, you know, he asked me well, first he asked me the 4 regular principles, and I said, no, you know, no meat eating, no illicit sex life, no gambling, and then my mind went blank. And I just froze. And then I couldn't think. And Prabhupada was waiting, and I completely frozen. I couldn't think anything, and somebody poked me from the side and said, no drugs. I said, oh, no intoxication. And Prabhupada laughed, and he said, yes, no LSD. Then he asked me how many rounds, and he handed my beads and said, so your name is Bandhu. Bandhu means friend of the humble. So I joined in Boulder where, you know, Bhavananda had gone there with Harinama to open the temple. So those were the days, you know, we had, you know, polyester and Dacron dhotis, but since, you know, he wasn't the temple president there, but he was, you know, something there. So I didn't have just an ordinary piece of Dacron cloth, you know, it was real shiny. It was so that real shiny meant that it was very slippery also. So, and those are the days we didn't tie that little knot, you know, it was just tucked in. And I was there jumping up and down, and all of a sudden I felt something go, zoop. It didn't actually fall off, but but I was so ecstatic. We were there in front of Prabhupada, and I just grabbed my dhoti and was just jumping up and down in front of Prabhupada. Another time, since we're here in Los Angeles, I was remembering how one time Prabhupada, that was when the temple room was in where the Fate Museum is now. And so Prabhupada used to come in the back door and then walk up to pay obeisances to the deities and everything, and then sit down at his Vyasasan. So Prabhupada came in the back door, and as soon as he came in, he cocked his head back, like you've seen how Prabhupada does, you know. And he said, what is there in Krishna's eye? And all I know is from that back door to where the little, because we only had the little deities that time, from that back door I can't even see if Krishna has an eye, what to speak of see what's in Krishna's eye. And Prabhupada said, what is that in Krishna's eye? And even the pujaris who were right up there, it took them 2 minutes, they were just looking all around trying to figure out, and they finally found some piece of the tilak, when they had put the tilak on, a little splinter of tilak had fallen down in Krishna's eye. And we were all totally shocked. One time, this was, I can't remember what year, but now we were into where the temple room is now, and Prabhupada was sitting in that big Vyasasan there. And he gave a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, Prabhupada said, so if you will just follow these 4 regulative principles and chant 16 rounds, then you will go back to home, back to Godhead. I guarantee it. And Prabhupada paused, and he just sort of looked around at all of us. And then again he said, I guarantee it. So we were walking down the beach, and so Dr. Judah said, Prabhupada, what do you do about the question of lust? And Prabhupada stopped, and he dug his cane in the sand. He said, unless you become Krishna conscious, there's no solution. He said, you have to become Krishna conscious. Otherwise, there's no solution to this lust. And then he walked on, and again he repeated. He said, if you become Krishna conscious, then this question of lust is solved. Otherwise, you cannot solve it any other way. Which is like Prabhupada was saying, that you can do so many things. You can cut down eating your sweets, or you can, do so many things. Have, defense mechanisms like young brahmacharis that women are snakes and this and that. He said, but unless you become Krishna conscious, you just go on with your service, become Krishna conscious, and you can overcome this. And I remember one time, must have been 1970, we came out for Rath Yatra, but we knew that Prabhupada was in LA, so we drove out from Boulder and we came to LA first. And that was the very beginning when Prabhupada started the Govinda prayers. Before that, that wasn't, that's taken for granted now. In the very beginning of the movement, we didn't have Govinda prayers. So it was either like the second or maybe the third day that they were playing Jamuna's tape of the Govinda prayers. So Prabhupada came in, and they played the tape, and he paid his obeisance, he took the charnamrita, and he sat down on the Vyasasan. And he was singing along and just sort of, not clapping his hands, but just, like this. And suddenly we saw tears were just gliding down Prabhupada's cheeks. And we were all just like feeling, who are we to be present in the presence of, Prabhupada experiencing these ecstatic symptoms, just like one of the, lift up one of those old linoleum tiles, and crawl under, we just felt like so low. What are we doing here, And then Prabhupada suddenly, he just, big sniff, and he wiped his face like that, and then he just started chanting the Isopanishad mantras, because those days he was teaching, He just started just like always thought it was like a sea captain, he would just sit there. Om Purnam Adaha Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. This very deep, rich voice, it just sounded like, to me it reminded me like a sea captain. I remember those were, every day he would teach us another verse, and we would chant all the way up to that verse, and then he would teach us another verse the next day. Somehow or other, whenever I came down to LA, I'd always make sure that I was sitting right at the foot of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan. So one day Prabhupada came in, he sat down in his Vyasasan, and I was sitting right there, and Prabhupada looked rather concerned, and he pointed his finger toward me. And I couldn't figure out what was, and I looked down, I thought, God, maybe my dhoti's open, or, what's wrong, and I looked, and I couldn't see anything. And then I looked back up, and Prabhupada nodded his head like everything was okay, and I saw my hands were resting on my knees, sort of like in yogi position. So I just froze in that position. Now everything's all right. Whatever was wrong is all right now. So I was just sitting there, and Prabhupada was giving his lecture. And in the middle of his lecture, whatever it was that was stirring Prabhupada started again, which was that I was wobbling my knee like this, like we sometimes used to do. So all of a sudden, in the middle of his lecture, Prabhupada stopped and he pointed at me and said, "Don't do that." Somewhere I have to search through all the tapes and find it, but it was when he just, "Don't do that." Then I stopped, So I think it must have been 1975 when the opening of Krishna Balaram Temple was there. And every day Prabhupada used to go down, they unfortunately still call it Chatikara Road, but it's now legally the Bhaktivedanta Swami Marg. So we would all walk with Prabhupada. So one day Prabhupada was walking down, and he was just so heavily preaching against abortion and birth control. He was just going on talking about how nasty this abortion is, this Kali Yuga. And he gave the example, he said, just like if I purchase an apartment and I go there to take possession and you stop me, that is illegal. You will be arrested if I go to the police. Or if I'm living in the apartment and you come to kick me out, it is illegal. You will be arrested. Like that. So that soul, he's purchased that womb, that's his apartment. If you stop him to come, that is illegal. If he's inside and you kick him out, that is illegal. And he just went on saying about, you will go from womb to womb and you will never see the light of day. He was just preaching so heavily against abortion. And on the way back, he was a little quiet. And there was one Indian man there, and he suddenly said, "Oh, Prabhupada, I read today that this Guru Maharaj Ji, his mother has denounced him." And we all laughed. And Prabhupada said, "What is that?" He said, "This Guru Maharaj Ji, she's come in the papers and she's saying this guy is a bogus fellow and she's denounced him." And Prabhupada laughed and everyone laughed, and we walked a few more steps, and that Indian man said, "Yes, practically she has finished him." And Prabhupada stopped and he dug his cane into the street and he looked at all of us and he said, "She should have finished him in the womb." Prabhupada was telling about there was one yogi. So the mouse came and he complained to the yogi that this cat is always bothering me. So yogi said, "What do you want?" He said, "I want to become a cat and the cat won't bother me." So yogi waved his hand and he became a cat. Then later he came back and yogi said, "Now what's the matter?" He said, you want something?" He said, "Yes, I want to become a dog. Now this dog is always chasing me and bothering me. So I want to become a dog." He said, "Oh, you want to become a dog? All right, you become a dog." So he became a dog. So then after a while he came back to the yogi and yogi said, Now you want something?" He said, "Yes, now this tiger is bothering me. I want to become a tiger." He said, "Oh, you want to become tiger? All right, now you become a tiger." So when he became tiger, then he was looking at that yogi with longing in his eyes. And yogi said, "Oh, you want to eat me?" And tiger shook his head, "Yes." So Prabhupada said, then yogi said, "Punarmushika bhava," again become a mouse. So we all just burst out laughing, but Prabhupada, was he meant it to be serious. I mean, later we understood, because we became puffed up with our position and so many things and failed to realize that Prabhupada was actually the real power behind us. So Prabhupada had a very serious message that he wanted us to understand, that don't become big and think that now I'm very big, I can take over my spiritual master's position. So he just looked at me and said, "Serious, try to understand, don't laugh." Kartikeya was cooking for Prabhupada. And one day Govindadasi came and she brought some wheat germ. And Kartikeya saw this wheat germ. He said, "Next time Prabhupada asks for halava, I'm going to make it with wheat germ instead of with the semolina, with the farina." And so one day it rained. And he said Prabhupada used to like to take halava on rainy days because it, gave him lots of warmth. So he asked Kartikeya to make this halava. So Kartikeya went in the kitchen, and then he was thinking that, "Oh, Prabhupada's going to be so pleased. I'm going to make this halava with wheat germ. He's going to like this so much." You're just meditating like that, how much Prabhupada was going to like this. And so he offered it to the deities, and he brought it into Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada looked at the bowl. He said, "What is this?" Halava means farina. And then with his left hand, which is very heavy, when you reject something with left hand, that's really rejection. So take it away. So Kartikeya, he was just, his whole heart was like, that, and he was a very sensitive fellow, and his whole heart was that Prabhupada's going to be so pleased. So he was just like completely devastated. And he went into the temple room and he sat down in front of the picture of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And he began to pray that, "Actually, I was just trying to please your spiritual son, and now he's so upset with me, I don't know what to do." And he was just like crying, because he's a very sensitive fellow. He said, "But actually, I was just trying to please your spiritual son." Suddenly he heard Prabhupada's voice, "Kartikeya? Kartikeya?" And he ran into Prabhupada's room. He said, "Bring that halava." So he brought him a bowl of halava. Prabhupada ate. He said, "Bring more." In this way, Prabhupada finished off the whole pot of halava. So Prabhupada always told us, that the grandfather is more merciful than the father. So young devotees should not feel that, well, I didn't get any association with Prabhupada, I didn't, get to see Prabhupada. Prabhupada is your grandfather, spiritual master. And he's more, to us, he's, I sometimes feel he's chastising me because I'm just not doing as much service as I could. But for all of the young devotees, Prabhupada he's already so merciful. We can just imagine the grandfather spiritual master is more merciful. So you've got Prabhupada as your grandfather spiritual master. He's more merciful. I remember when I first came to Los Angeles, at that time Prabhupada said Los Angeles is a training center, and it was snowing in Boulder anyway, and they didn't know what to do with me, although I was perfectly happy to sit and read Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam all day long. But they figured I would fall into Maya, so they sent me to LA to get trained up. And that time I think Dayananda might have been the temple president or something, that he came to the airport and picked me up and brought me back to the temple. And the first devotee I ran into was a devotee named Mahapurush. And he began to tell me a story. I just walked in the door and he started telling me the story way back on 26 2nd Avenue, that he used to go there and take prasadam, because every day, everybody would come and they'd sit in Swamiji's apartment and he would serve out, rice dal chapatis and everything to everyone. And one day he stayed a little late. Everybody had sort of gotten up and left, and he stayed a little late. And he suddenly noticed that there was only 2 people in the room and that there was all these dirty pots. And he began to think, well, somehow these dirty pots get cleaned every day. And I don't see anybody else around. There's only one other person in this room, and I'm usually not here. So there's only one other person in this room who could be doing this. So he thought, well, it's not proper, so he began to pick up the pots. At that moment, Prabhupada smiled, and he said, I was just praying to Krishna to please send someone to help me. So the amazing thing was, we know that the real perfection of, if we want to get Mahaprabhu's mercy, then he's told us, Trinadapi sunichena charodapi sehishna manina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. And nobody has realized the purport of that verse like Srila Prabhupada. Because he could have stayed in any Gaudiya mat. They all loved him. They knew that Abhay Babu sang sweet kirtans, he lectured wonderfully, he wrote wonderful articles. He could have stayed anywhere, and you go in any Gaudiya mat, you see any old sannyasi, but they just, they have very nice etiquette, and they wait on them hand and foot. He wouldn't have to do anything, but to speak of wash a pot, no cooking, no nothing, everything. He could have lived a very comfortable life in Vrindavan. Instead, here he was washing the pots for these hippies. I mean, we were like the most degraded class of persons. And Prabhupada, he had realized the purport like nobody. I mean, we couldn't even begin to imagine. Couldn't even think of doing the same thing ourselves nowadays. But Prabhupada was cooking and he was cleaning up after people like us, just out of his, Prabhupada's humility and compassion is unparalleled. There's no one like Prabhupada, and there'll never be anyone like Prabhupada. Je anilo